Hey everyone, welcome back to the workshop. Artisan Pirate here, and in today's fun scroll saw project video, we're going to be doing some more compound cut work. I really like doing compound cut projects over on the scroll saw because it shows the versatility and the uniqueness of what a scroll saw is capable of. Not only flat two-dimensional projects, but it can also take it into the third dimension with the compound cutting technique. The pattern we're going to be doing comes from a very old issue of Scroll Saw Woodworking and Crafts magazine by Fox Chapel Publishing. As a matter of fact, it's so far back that the magazine's original name is on the cover, just Scroll Saw Workshop here. This is one of those magazines we found while doing some spring cleaning earlier in the year, and it says Scroll Saw Workshop Summer 2005 issue 19, so we really went back in the magazine's archive. And the article we're going to be doing begins on page 58, and it's going to be a miniature compound cut medieval dragon design. And you guys know I love doing the fantasy, medieval, fantasy, and dragon inspired projects because that's just what I loved when I was younger. You know, now I'm into the pirate stuff and history and so many other things, but way back when I was younger, I was really fascinated with dragons, just art forms of dragons. You know, you have the beautiful long Chinese dragons, you have the medieval dragons that, you know, protected castles or fort castles or things like that. And we've done some mini dragon projects in the past. Here is one here that was made with the flat two-dimensional scroll saw process. You know, it was more traditional scroll saw work where everything was cut out in a flat two-dimensional manner, and then everything was glued together here to make this miniature sitting dragon diorama. This is an older Steve Good design for those curious. But as I said, this is going to be a miniature medieval compound cut dragon, so we're going to make a dragon in a different way. And here you see the article. It says, Boo, the Magic Dragon. Compound cut this fantastic creature by Miss Diana Thompson, so thank you for the beautiful and unique design. It says, this whimsical design makes a great present. Since it is compound cut, people will wonder how you did it on your scroll saw. Once again, showing off the scroll saw's versatility, as I always say. But it is a multi-part compound cut project. You don't have to do just one individual piece. You know, you can cut out multiple pieces and combine them together like we will do in today's video here. But it follows with an article here on the next couple pages telling you how to do the compound cut project, and it also has a list of materials that you may need. And then on that last page there, on page 61, you have the full-size patterns that we have already photocopied to their full size and got them attached to our material. Now there's going to be two small pieces of traditional flat scroll saw work, and that is going to be the base. It's going to be two pieces of 1/4 inch material. It's two simple circles here, and once you cut them out, it's going to make kind of a staged or tiered appearance, you know, to where the little miniature dragon will stand on. And then the rest of the pieces right here in my hand are all pine material. You guys know I love using pine to teach with visually over here on the platform because it's readily available in my area, and it cuts, sands, shapes, and contours exceptionally well, and it takes paint, stains, and clear coats well as well. So here is the whole dragon design, and it's going to be 4 compound cut pieces we're going to have to do, and they're going to be very fragile and very delicate, so we'll do what we always do at the scroll saw and take our time and let the blade do the work. And I hope it goes without saying, with the uniqueness of compound cutting and the necessity to make sure everything is dialed in at a perfect 90 degrees, just quickly double check that your table saw, your bandsaw, whatever tool you use to mill down your material is dialed in at a perfect 90 degrees, and also make sure your scroll saw is dialed in at a perfect 90 degrees to make sure everything comes out as precise as possible. But you can see there's 3 very small pieces here, and then the larger piece here that makes up the dragon's body. I'm going to hold all of them up quickly here before we get started. You do have the dragon's hands here, and you can see you're going to cut out both of them at the same time. And again, they're going to be very fragile and delicate once we get them cut out over at the scroll saw, so I'm going to be as careful as possible. Then you have the dragon's tail here, and these 3 pieces here that I'm showing you, the final one here being the wings, all of these were milled down from a basic 3/4 inch pine shelving board for those curious. And then the main bulk of the scroll saw work, which is the dragon's body here, is an 1.5 inch thick piece of pine that I milled down from that block of pine we have been milling projects down for compound cut videos. But you can see the profile of the dragon there, and then you have the front of it, and the patterns were all folded sharply and precisely along that dotted line as indicated in the pattern when you photocopy it. after I trimmed it out. And if you are uncomfortable holding those small and delicate pieces like this, you can of course use a compound cutting jig over at the scroll saw to give you more surface area to grip to. I do not think I'm going to be using this compound cut jig in today's video. I feel confident in my abilities, but my good friend up in New York, my buddy Robert, he made this and sent it to me. No, he actually brought it to me when he came down one year, and he presented it to me, and I have used it in previous compound cut scroll saw project videos, and I've held it up when talking about scroll saw tools and accessories. But it's a very versatile jig to be able to clamp it in there and give you more surface area to grip to. And as a matter of fact, there is no pilot holes whatsoever on this project. So what we're going to do now is move the camera directly over to the scroll saw so we can get this miniature medieval compound cut dragon diorama started. And before we get started, I will double check with my 3D printed blade alignment jig to make sure the scroll saw is dialed in, and then I'll begin scrolling. For all of the scrolling on this project, I'll be using a number 5 Ultra Reverse Shark Tooth scroll saw blade, and even though we are cutting through around 1.5 inches thick of material here, keep in mind it is pine, and pine is a softer material, so the number 5 blade will work fine as long as you take your time and let the blade do the work. Beginning here on the back side of the dragon, or the face side, I am just going around here, and this is a very slow cut over at the scroll saw, but I'm being as loyal as I can be to the cut line. But I'll follow that perimeter cut line all the way around, and once I get all the way down to the dragon's foot, we will step over to the workbench. And this is a totally optional step that I do. I like to slide the piece out and remove as much of that excess sawdust as possible before putting the piece back in and taping it back together. Some of that excess sawdust can generate heat and friction burn marks on the piece while you are over at the scroll saw. But after it is taped back in place, we can finish releasing the profile of the dragon. We are now cutting out the side here, and it has a little bit more detail. Just again, following that perimeter cut line to the best of my abilities. And of course here, you want to make sure that you are taking your time and letting the blade do the work, because you would not want that blade to bend due to aggressive cutting, because if that blade warps or bends within the material, you will not be able to take the piece apart once you get done with all of the scroll saw work. But now we are cutting out some of the smaller parts. Again, all of this is pine material, so it cuts very well over on the scroll saw. And some of these pieces I am cutting out are very small and fragile, but I am confident in my abilities over at the scroll saw, so I am not using any kind of compound cutting jig or anything like that. If you guys like what you're seeing, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to my channel, and also follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. I'd really appreciate the support. And once again, this beautiful and creative design for scroll saw woodworking is available in a very old issue of Scroll Saw Woodworking and Crafts magazine by Fox Chapel Publishing, back when the magazine was just called Scroll Saw Workshop. But we are finishing up here with all of the scroll saw work, and then we will step back over to the workbench, and we will carefully remove all of the pieces from the waste material. Of course, I'm being very careful here because I do not want to break anything. Again, pine is a softer material, and the pieces are very fragile. Sanding up the bases here, which is 2 simple circles we cut out over on the scroll saw from 1/4 inch material with Klingspor Woodworking Shop sandpaper. And then I'll go on and glue the base together here with medium grade CA glue and activator. And after it had dried and cured, I gave it a very dark shade of Minwax wood stain, and once I had stained it and wiped away all of the excess, I set it aside to dry. And while it was drying, we could focus on gluing up and assembling the dragon itself. And I'll be using more medium grade CA glue and activator. And I really want to reiterate how fragile all of these small pieces are. So I'm being as careful as I can be. The tail was the hardest part to glue on because of how small it was. And I actually broke the tail and I had to mend it. But then I will glue on the dragon's front legs here, his hands. And I wanted to get those positioned properly. But once all of the glue up was done, I set it aside for around 5 minutes to make sure that that glue had completely dried and cured. And then it was time for some touch-up sanding with some various sanding sticks. Some of these subscribers have sent me in the past, and they're really good to get into all of those little nooks and crannies on compound cuts like this. But after I was satisfied with how the dragon looked, we went back over to the table saw and gave the dragon itself a very light shade of Minwax wood stain that still allowed the natural grains and textures of the pine material we used to shine through. But after it was stained, I carefully wiped away all of the excess and set it aside to dry with the base. And after both pieces were dry, it was time to put them together with more medium grade CA glue and activator. And after it had completely dried and cured, it was time for finishing. And for finishing, I gave the little 3D dragon several coats of Rust-Oleum clear gloss. It really makes the grain textures pop and gives it a nice glossy appearance. And here we have the completed miniature medieval dragon design cut out completely over on the scroll saw using the compound cutting technique. And he finished up beautifully with some nice and crisp details in him. Really cool, really unique design to show off what a scroll saw is capable of. I want to once again thank Miss Diana Thompson for a beautiful and unique design from a previous issue of Scroll Saw Woodworking and Crafts magazine by Fox Chapel Publishing. I'll hold that magazine up again momentarily as we close the video here, but everything came out nice and crisp here. It took me around an hour to do all of the scroll saw work over at the scroll saw. Due to the nature of some of the cuts, it is a very fragile and tedious cut. And with the nature of compound cutting, you want to, of course, take your time and let the blade do the work and be as loyal as you can be to the cut line. And I hope the results that I have produced here speak for themselves with how I took my time over at the scroll saw while cutting everything out. And as I said at the beginning, there is some very fragile pieces to cut out as well as very small pieces to cut out. And if you are uncomfortable holding those small pieces that make up the hands there or the tail in the back, you can of course use a compound cutting jig over at the scroll saw as I showed at the beginning of the video. I have used this in the past to show you guys how to use it, but I feel confident in my abilities over at the scroll saw. That is why I did not use the jig in today's video. But if you wanted to use it, you could put those small parts in between the two pieces of wood there and clamp it down, and it would give you more surface area to grip on over at the scroll saw, if that makes any sense. And you can keep your fingers well away from the blade, my friends. But really cool here. As I said, everything here is basic material that is readily available in my area. We talked about the material at the beginning of the video. The base, which is very simplistic in nature, which I really like for a project like this because the base does not take away from the overall project that you are presenting on the base. The base is 2 pieces of 1/4-inch material that I like to use, and then the whole entire dragon is made out of basic pine material. Again, it's readily available in my area, and it cuts, sands, shapes, and contours exceptionally well, and it also takes paint, stains, and clear coats very well, and it's just a great material to teach with visually over here on the platform. Here is a leftover piece from the block I milled down to make up the dragon's body, and here is the leftover piece that made up the dragon's front paws, his wings and his tail there, and the tail is very fragile. I did break it during the staining process, and I had to glue it back together with medium grade CA glue and activator. But again, these are very fragile and delicate parts and pieces to cut out. But once you get them all cut out and everything assembled, it really shows off what a scroll saw is capable of, my friends. Not only do they cut out flat two-dimensional pieces as they are traditionally known for, but they can take it into the third dimension with beautiful pieces like this with a little bit of time, patience, and effort. Really, really unique design, as I said, and it takes me back to when my mom painted all of those ceramic dragons for me back in childhood. I still have all of them. A few of them are displayed still, you know, in my adulthood now, but the rest of them are carefully packed away, and hopefully one day they'll be displayed again, you know, because I just love the beauty of dragons. They are very versatile and unique in their own manner with how they are presented. You have the long sloping dragons, you have the dragons like this, you have the dragons in fantasy and fairy tales that like to guard and protect the gold hoards and everything, and the ones that fly around castles and everything. And I myself was born in the Chinese zodiac of the year of the dragon. That was 1988 to be precise. So really cool, really brought back a lot of fun memories while I was scrolling this project out. And again, we have made dragon designs in the past. We made this one here, which was a Steve Good design, which uses the traditional scroll saw method of cutting out pieces in a flat two-dimensional manner, but we glued them together to make a beautiful miniature diorama of the dragon sitting down there with his wings out. This dragon here that we made today was made using the compound cutting technique. And speaking of the compound cutting technique, as I said at the beginning, and I'll say it again here, you need to make sure that your table saw, your band saw, whatever tool you mill your stock down to the proper dimensions on, you need to, of course, make sure that it's dialed in at a perfect 90 degrees. And of course, you need to double check and make sure your scroll saw is dialed in at a perfect 90 degrees before you get to scrolling. And as long as everything is dialed in perfectly and you take your time and let the blade do the work, everything should come out nice and crisp as it has in today's video. I finished this project in a standard rustic finishing way. I stained the base a nice dark color, and then we stained the dragon himself a very light shade of Minwax wood stain that still allows the natural grains and textures of the pine material to shine through. And then we finished everything off with several coats of Rust-Oleum clear gloss, and you can see him shining there in the lights of the workshop. And I finished him with stain. Of course, if you were good with paints, you could go in with acrylic craft paints and paint everything up, paint him a nice green color, maybe put some yellow on his belly, you know, to show the underside, put the horns red, the tail a different color. You know, you could go above and beyond with projects like this. And I always like to talk about a pattern's versatility. Now, I don't think you could cut this project out any differently. As I always say, you could enlarge, shrink, use a part for this, a part for that. But I think this project does have several display options. You could, of course, put him on a base as I have here, but with his feet being so big and he has some nice surface area to stand on with his feet, he does not even need a base to stand on. I stood him back on the workbench just to see how steady he was. He can teeter-totter around, and if he falls over, you would potentially risk the paws, the wings, or the tail breaking off because they are, again, very delicate pieces. But he does not need a base to stand on if you just want to put him up on a shelf to display with some other dragon or fantasy-inspired books, or, you know, display stuff like a magic ball or things like that. So options and versatility, and I also think he could be a nice little trophy piece for a medieval inspired game, maybe Dungeons and Dragons. You could cut this project out and use a different base, maybe a square base where you could put a plate on it, you know, like from a trophy shop, and use him as an award for like first place, second place, third place, player's choice, you know, something like that. So there's always display and use possibilities for each and every scroll saw project you come across. But I cut him out as intended out of the magazine, and as I get ready to hold the magazine up, I just said something like a magic ball or crystal ball. The one in the magazine depicted visually so you could see how the finished project looked does have a little ball held in his hand, and in the parts list it does say get a 1/2 inch wooden ball. I opted not to add that to his front paws. I just like him standing there in kind of a, you know, he's ready to attack mode, you know, kind of in that aspect. But you could, of course, put something between his paws. You could hang maybe a medieval inspired ring from his paws, or a little bracelet or something. There's probably enough room to hang a bracelet there. Or if it was around Christmas time for a different approach, you could go get one of those little miniature presents from the hobby store and put it between his paws and display him during the Christmas season. So again, just creative uses for each and every project and pattern you come across for scroll saw woodworking. But once again, this very unique design come from a very old issue of Scroll Saw Woodworking and Crafts magazine by Fox Chapel Publishing, way back when it was just called the Scroll Saw Workshop magazine, the how-to magazine for woodcrafters. And this is summer 2005, issue 19, and there you see the cover, and there's an article in there on how to cut out dovetail joints over on the scroll saw, so that's very unique as well. And then the design we used in today's video began on page 58, and again by Miss Diana Thompson, so thank you for the beautiful and unique design. And the one that they cut out in the magazine, as you go through the article, there's a parts list on all of the projects featured in all the magazines I used. They used cypress and cedar, so again, just different materials used to make the same design that we have made here. Just be aware that if you use harder or denser material, keep in mind I used a very soft and light pine material and 1/4" material in today's video, but if you use the harder or denser materials, it's going to be that much more slower of a cut due to the feed rate over at the scroll saw, so just be aware of that. But after the article on page 61 is the full-size patterns that we photocopied over at the printer to get the patterns that we attached to our material for today's video. But really cool. Had a lot of fun making this video, and it brought back a lot of memories as well from childhood with all of the ceramic dragons my mom painted for me. Thank you, Mom, for painting those for me. So really cool. One more look at him as we close the video. I hope in some way, shape, or form it inspires you guys to head out into your garage or workshops and try a compound cut design and also a multi-part compound cut design over at your scroll saw. Just with a little bit of time, effort, patience, and taking your time and letting the blade do the work, a beautiful 3D image like this miniature dragon will emerge. But that's going to be about all for this one. If you're new to the channel, hopefully you'll click that subscribe button and also follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. As always, links to contact me as well as all my social media feeds will always be linked down in the description box below these videos. That's about all for this one, and remember guys, if I can make it or do it, so can you guys. I'm the Artisan Pirate. Take care, and I'll see you guys real soon.